I guess my name is Lastuka. Yeah, I ranch in the Drywood, Yarrow area. With my wife and myself, we have a purebred Angus operation. Formerly, I was 27 years in the. I grew up in the irrigation district, so I know quite a bit about that. And moved to a ranching operation, hoping there'd be less work, but it didn't happen. I guess I learned so far that one thing we're fortunate, we haven't had any oil spills in our watershed yet. But the microbial, what is it, source, what's it called? Source tracking. We are involved with that, so I'll mention that a little bit later when we talk about that. One thing I'll start with watershed stewardship groups. Can I just take this off, Tim?
Yeah.
When we first sat down as a watershed stewardship group, we actually felt that the mission statement was very, very important. It sets up what you're going to do and why you're going to do it. And so we took some time and actually developed it. So with ours to maintain and improve the riparian and upland health of Drywood Yarrow watershed through management and education. And so we have to go back to that once in a while to always make sure that we're doing the right thing and for the right reason. Where we're located, there's the yellow circle there. That's the Drywood Yarrow area. Montana to the south, you can see. We're south of Pincher Creek, and we're nestled up to the north of the Waterton National Park. To the south of us, and to the west, this is also the forestry area. We're approximately, I don't know, 100 kilometers from Lethbridge, and probably 50 from Carson, and 30 or so from Pincher Creek. A bit of statistics, we're at a fairly high elevation. Highest peak is our Loaf Mountain. And we also have the Waterton Reservoir in our area. So that's actually the very downstream end of our watershed. We have a huge vertical drop, 4,770 feet, and we've got 100 miles of stream length, 50 plus landowners. We do have industry in our watershed too. We have the Shell Waterton Complex and Trinity Energy. One of the key things that we're now involved with, and we think is one of our most important things that we're doing, is what we call our annual Riparian education day. Actually, we just had it last Monday, I believe. I couldn't attend it, but what we do there is we're trying to bring in the education back to the school system. We think it's kind of been lost for the rural kids, not even rural kids, the urban kids to be educated as to what's going on in the rural areas. And what we do there is we, with our partners, SRD, Fish and Wildlife, also Public Lands, Parks Canada, Alberta Fish and Wildlife, Cows and Fish, ACA. They all put up stations along the creek, and they all talk about the things that they're most notable for in a way to educate the children. So we have like 5 stations and rotate the groups around. And it's a very, very successful day. Fish and Wildlife, of course, brings up an actual real grizzly bear and introduces them into the Bear Smart program and a few other things, and also how bear spray works and whatnot. Cows and Fish introduces them into the riparian, the education on the riparian and what it does for it, and whatnot. They all do a really good job, and it's very, very informative. And I think this year we had 60 kids. Last year we had 120 from different schools. And every year it's an ongoing event where we have a lot of interest from people that do it. And one thing I would suggest, you guys are for the WPAC, I put a lot into. There needs to be more input into the school system getting back out to the rural areas for education. I know they think about liability and all that, but you're really losing something in what those kids can learn and what they're doing it for and why they're doing it and who's doing it as in the rural farmers and ranchers. We called our group the Drywood Yarrow Conservation Partnership because we really are a partnership. We partnership with a few groups like I mentioned before, SRD, Trout Unlimited, a bunch of other ones, and that's really what it is. It's a partnership. We help them and they help us, and it's been a really good joint thing over the years. And we also learned that from other stewardship groups, but that's really what makes a stewardship group success is the partners in the whole part of it. We also had Multi-Star involved for a while. We did some off-creek watering for some species of risk that were identified in our area. We have Trout Unlimited Canada, History of Fish and Wildlife, has helped us with some fertile windbreaks, well and water development, and also predator-proof electric fencing. I'll probably get into that a little bit more a little later. I'll give a little bit of history about how the Drywood Yarrow evolved. I think in the year 2000, hang on, I just gotta check this on the next slide. No, it's not. In the year 2000, it kind of started up as just the Drywood group because they wanted to do some riparian assessments from the ASA grant. And just in doing that, you know, it was kind of a kickstart, but you know, when you do a riparian assessment, it tells you where you are, but it really doesn't give you much guidance as to where you should go from that. So it kind of stalled. Producers saw value, but they didn't know where to go. So, like Lastuka stewardship groups, they kind of halted and wondered where to go. A few years after that, we decided, we had another meeting, and we decided to do some monitoring on that, on some of the sites we already did. But we brought the group together and we had some open houses for the people in our wash to see what the issues were. One of the things that kept coming up is our carnivore issues. So we weren't sure what to do with that. So what we did do, we didn't know what was going to happen, is we put on what we called the bears, wolves, and people living together open house to see what the issues were. We had 70 people that attended, but I think it was more like 120 or more. There's a lot of NGOs, industry, general interest. And it was a good session to discuss, you know, how do people in that watershed live together with all these other carnivores that were affecting us on day-to-day life. And I'll get that to a little more detail along the way too. So what was the common issue? Well, we were having increased sightings, and what I mean by that, when we're talking about large carnivore, I mean, the people in our area, the ranchers, they're used to seeing grizzly bears. But our president, Tony Bruder, you know, he started to see 14 off of his deck. And that's not even moving out of his house. And it starts becoming an issue, and, you know, the worry about a fatality, of course. With those large carnivores coming closer, not being scared of humans, and walking across, you know, the roads right in front of kids that are catching the bus, it's starting to become an issue. The other issue was, if there's that many conflicts, why isn't there concern by SRD Fish and Wildlife? They had conducted a DNA study in 2008, and they said there was only 30 bears south of Highway 3. Well, all the producers and from the information we got says that there was a lot more than 30 bears in our area. And like one producer said, there's 30 in my own backyard. Knowing that there's an issue, well, how do you go about developing something to solve it? Then again, working with SRD Fish and Wildlife, we sat down, we looked at what are the issues, what we can do, what we can't do. And we started working on, one of the highest things I should mention we started working on was deadstock. That's some of the attractants that were identified, which is some of the common issues for mostly grizzly bears and black bears in our area. And one of the main attractants is deadstock. The other attractants, of course, are beehives, feed storage, what else? Of course, garbage, things like that. But the main issue is deadstock, it always has been. And a lot of that information is based on some of the calls that are put forward into Fish and Wildlife as to them having problems with the grizzly bear. And the number one thing that always kept coming up was, of course, grizzly bear on deadstock. So what we did is we actually had some bins constructed and built, and we put them in a couple places across the district. And what we found with that is there's a lot of issues, or not just issues, but permitting is required for that. Because of BSE, the SRM issue is there. So as a producer, if you have deadstock, you can take care of it on your own place by putting it in the backyard and letting it be scavenged. That's okay, that's allowed. But as soon as you move that dead livestock off your place, you're then required to have a transfer permit, and it has to be registered with CFIA, and you also have to have an RFID tag in that dead animal. It was an issue with some of our producers having to put a tag in especially a dead calf. One of the big issues, of course, is in the spring when we have a little more higher mortality because of the calving season. Most of the people always have a dead pile or calling where those dead stock are going. So, for producers to have to put a tag in a dead animal doesn't make much sense, but we worked with CFA, we obtained permits, we allowed the producers to get the permits, we convinced them that, you know, it's not a big deal, and CFA was really good about it, actually worked with us to make it a smooth process. And from that, then producers can then actually take the dead calves to these bins. In doing so, you still have to get the bins moved to the rendering plant. And since BSC, they were picking them up for free, but because it's gone down, they now charge, I think it's 9 cents a pound. Is it 10? What is it? 11. Yeah, I think he's right. It was 9, now it's 11. Just to give you an example, we did some work of our own in the area of Pincher Creek. Prior to BSC, they were picking up 1,200 head of dead stock a year. After BSC, it dwindled down to about 200. So you can see there's a lot of livestock that was being left on the landscape, which of course is attractive for large carnivores, and then they were starting to be aware of it and be a healthy thing. But I guess one of the key things that, you know, we sat back and looked at those is if all these grizzly bears are healthy, and yeah, they got a food source, but they also got habitat. And our ranchers have done a good job that we have good habitat, and that's why the grizzlies are flourishing. The other thing I'm going to mention, though, with other partners, because some people's talking about this, go back to this MST, microbial source tracking. With partners in research, we've learned in our group, in our watershed, that a lot of research is done. Sure, it's done, but a lot of it's done in the green zone. What the green zone, I mean, is the forestry. Researchers don't like to do research in the white zone, which is where producers are, because then they actually have to talk to them. I know that sounds silly, but it's true, because they want to do the research as fast as they can and get results and don't have to want to deal with people. One researcher was doing some collaring of grizzly bears, and he happened to trank a grizzly bear, and in their helicopter they just happened to fly down on one of our members' backyards. That was a good scene. And when he didn't have approval, they didn't acknowledge, didn't let people know that what was going on, and it turned into quite a scene. Learning from that, another researcher, Andrew Morehouse, was doing the microbial source tracking with wolf scat. And in doing so, we provided an avenue for all researchers to come, and they could go through us, and we would then be able to be a conduit where they could tell us what they're doing, and we would let everybody know so that everybody would be on the same page. Researchers were actually astonished when we told them this. We went to a meeting once, and we gave them some advice that, you know, we were open to research, and, you know, we provided the forums for them to do that. They couldn't believe it. They were just shocked. And so Andrew was really successful in doing that, and we had good success, and we helped her learn a lot more information about wolves and how they move as part of the large carnivore program. From that, Andrew has now moved to the DNA study. If you recall earlier, I talked about the DNA study done in 2008 that we didn't believe in, and no one else did. They're going to replicate a DNA study that was done in the States that was very successful in our area, so they started in the green zone again, just because that's where she wanted to start to begin with, but she's going to move into the white zone with our assistance. And basically what they're doing there is they're collecting DNA samples, DNA hair, all along. They have set up what they call rub trees, rub spots, where they're collecting DNA. Then from that they can start collecting DNA for actually if it's the grizzly bears, and then starting identifying the families like you learned earlier. And from that research that they've done to date, just in the green zone, they've identified 52 different individual bears in our area. That doesn't include the white zone. From what I gather of your agenda, you guys have toured down Dalbonita, right, Tom? Right up to there.
We did a bit up in North Fork.
Right. So you guys went up to the West Fork of the Dalbonita. Well, there's grizzly bears just on the east side of Delvanita, if you can believe that. So they are moving out. There's lots of them. There's 400 in Montana. And of course they can easily just cross the border. They really don't care about it. Another nice side note is that Montana Fish and Wildlife, and they have problem bears, they dump them, of course, at the border. What else did I want to talk about, Tim? Something. I guess Tony wanted me to mention. Tony is our president. He wanted me to mention to you about funding, because that's a key issue for a lot of these stewardship groups. There used to be the Alberta Stewardship Network that provided funding, which was good. Some of the problems with that funding is there's nothing that's long term. If you want to do a 5-year project, what do you do? And it was smaller dollars when you do go on bigger dollars. The other thing that we've noticed, because we've been fortunate enough to build partnerships with Trout Unlimited and Fish and Wildlife, which is good, and they've given us some seed money for certain things, which helps their objectives and it helps our objectives, which works really good. With corporate sponsorship, it's tough for small stewardship groups like ourselves to get dollars. I mean, we're lucky we have Shell in our area. We get some seed money from them, which is really good. But a lot of other stewardship groups, it's really tough to get extra money if it's not government money. Producers are, tight with their money usually, especially in the beef industry. It's not been that rosy since BSC. It's getting better now, but there's also a lot more people getting out of it, and you don't see young people getting into it. So we're just going to go from there. The sponsorship money, what else would I like to say is that a lot of the corporate offices, of course, are in the big cities like Calgary. I mean, that's good, but I'm going to pick on Bow River, but I'm sure North Saskatchewan's the same way, because they have those big centers in their WPAC. It goes to that WPAC. I mean, in our stewardship group, the fishermen, the hunters, the recreation people, I would say 90% of them come from Calgary. But the sponsorship goes to the Bow River Council. It would be nice if something like what we've done in the Old Man Watershed, working with the rural team, we've developed the Watershed Legacy Program. I don't know if Tim's shown you that or not. It's developed, I think there's 7 different categories where funders could put their money into. It would be really good if something like that was developed on a provincial basis and gave the opportunity for sponsors, corporate sponsorship, to decide where they want that money to go.